My dad was always a fan of getting Airbnbs in the most bizarre and outlandish places possible. There are these websites called Bizarre Stays, Cool Stays, and Crazy Holidays. I didn't like any of this, as my dad saw it as some kind of a competition. Which one could be the craziest? Which one would be the most outlandish? To give you guys an idea, we'd stayed in a World War II bunker, literally sleeping next to the mud, dirt, and crawling bugs. I didn't get a single wink of sleep for 5 whole days, and when I got home, I slept for over 30 hours, which probably isn't very healthy. We stayed in other places, like really old houses on the edge of farms. We stayed in caravans. Weird boxes, teepees, tents, glow-in-the-dark tree houses, you name it, my dad probably stayed there. I think it's fair to say that this was his huge hobby, and along these stays, nothing bad would usually happen other than the fact that I'd almost die from sleep deprivation. Occasionally, depending on how severe the stay was, I would still be able to sleep, but today I wanted to tell you about the time my dad booked an Airbnb lighthouse. This wasn't any normal lighthouse. This lighthouse was abandoned, and it had been abandoned for many years. It was on the coast, so we had to drive over 4 hours just to get to it. I couldn't wait. Can you sense the sarcasm? Dad didn't give us much of a warning, but we knew that every summer holiday when school was off, he would always book these Airbnb trips for at least the first week. Me and my brother would always be scared that he had come up with the most scariest thing ever, for example, staying in a tree. I used to look on the website and dread Dad picking the one I was looking at. When he came into our room and told us that he had booked one, we were really hesitant to see what it actually was. The family all came together out in the living room and we sat around his laptop, which he had on his lap, while sipping on some glass of wine. He was happy, he was fidgeting his thumbs, and me and my brother were starting to get seriously worried what he had picked this time. As he went on to the window of the Cool Stays, he told us that he was looking at Airbnb lighthouses, but on this Cool Stays site, they didn't have one available for the time frame that he was looking for. So, unexpectedly, he shuts the lid of his laptop, and I actually think I've gotten away with the whole summer of not almost dying on one of his stupid trips again. But no, it turns out I was completely wrong. Once he shut his laptop and put it beside him, he pulled out his cell phone from his pocket. He unlocked that and then went on to Airbnb and showed us that he had already booked and even paid for one of the lighthouses that was up on there. He went through the photos and I was dreading it. Me and my brother kept staring at each other as Dad was happily explaining how many rooms it had. All the stats and specs, the metrics, the history, where it was located, and what it looks like, as if we couldn't see that from the images he was scrolling and swiping through. The best way I could explain it is a lighthouse, a medium lighthouse that looked rusted top to bottom. Which I'm assuming the lighthouse worker would live in when he wasn't working, or when he changed shift with his colleague/fellow employee. I didn't actually know if we'd be staying in the house next to it, or the lighthouse itself, but either way, being right by the coast, on the edge of a mountain/cliff, that's not my idea of fun, but it was Dad's. Mum didn't really care. If anything, she found it quite amusing. She liked the fact that me and my brother found this so annoying. In her eyes, it was just us getting out of the house, fresh air, exercise and socializing, when in actual fact, I don't think she realized it was doing us more harm than good. When we arrived at this lighthouse, it was exactly how it was in the photos. The whole thing was rusted top to bottom. Don't even get me started on the side house. The whole place looked awful. It had tiles missing. The chimney that was on there looked like it had been burned from a fire. It was smoldered black. One of the windows was smashed in, and even my dad, who looked at this, thought, "Hang on, we've just paid $1,000 for a week to stay here and the window isn't even normal." No shit, Dad, I thought to myself. What do you expect when you book places like this? My dad was gonna try and call the host, but for all we knew, he was up in Topala Lighthouse trying to search for the boats that were gonna crash into the cliff right beside us. Oh, and by the way, did I mention that there was a drop off the cliff of around 400 meters? Yeah, no barrier, no fence, so yeah. This was a fun holiday. When we got into the house, it turns out that there was no way of sleeping in the lighthouse. We were only allowed to go in that during the day to walk up and down it from the top to bottom. The view from the top was pretty impressive, but inside the lighthouse smelled really funny. It would be hard to describe the smell, but it would be like a mixture of rust, mold, and old soaking wet Wellington boots. I'm assuming that's what they used to wear, so it would make sense. The first night wasn't too bad, however, on the third night the wind started to pick up really bad. The wind was so strong that it was moving the house that we were sleeping in. There were only 2 rooms in this house and a front room, so if you include the front room with the kitchen and stove, there were 3. The toilet was actually inside the lighthouse at the very bottom. This was a huge fear of mine, seeing as I tend to get up in the night to go to the toilet at least once or maybe even twice. We had to go from the house, step out into the open, then go into the lighthouse using the old rusted key to unlock the door. During the third night, the wind was so bad that I couldn't sleep at all. I was just rolling around in my bed, which by the way was so narrow that if I rolled more than a few inches either side, I would fall off onto the hard wooden floor. My brother was also wide awake, I could tell, because he kept coughing and sniffling his nose. I just laid there trying my hardest to get to sleep, but the more you tried to get to sleep, the less it actually worked. And the more you just get pissed with yourself. I looked over at the clock on the bedside table. It was 2 o'clock in the morning and another huge gust of wind overcomes the house, rocking the frames from side to side. I'm not even joking when I say that it feels like and sounds like the house is moving every time there is a strong gust of wind. Surely this building was actually built to withstand the strong winds, the storms, and the rain on the coast. But it didn't seem like it at all. I could hear all the creaking, the timber moving, and worse, the windows were actually moving. I could have sworn that this building was about to take off at any second. We had no internet in this Airbnb, so that made it even worse, but to be totally honest with you, that was the last of my worries right now, as when I lay there, I realized that I need to go to the toilet. It's not the type of toilet that I can go to the bottle in or use some type of sink. Instead, this was the number 2 that I needed. And I simply had to walk my way around to the lighthouse to use the toilet there. I get up and walk to the front room. Mom and Dad had told me that the key would be left on the table next to our bags and a bunch of the food that Mom bought the other day. I popped on my shoes, put on a coat and put on my pants. I didn't want to go, but I needed to go so bad. And there's no way I could have held it for any longer. I grabbed the key, unlocked the front door of the house with the keys that are still in the keyhole, then I shut the door behind me, holding this massive rusted black key, which to be honest, looks and smells awful. The second I step out of the door, a huge gust of wind blows me back inside of the house. I can hear my dad. Is everything alright? What the hell? He comes out of his room. I explain that I got blown back and he helps me out the door. Then he shuts the door behind me, but struggles to do so in the process. Once I get out there, I feel like I'm being blown off my feet and I take a few steps in the wrong direction because I have to counteract how strong the wind actually is. The wind was trying to blow me against the house, so I had to walk away from it in order to get round it. We didn't know what the miles per hour of these gusts were because we didn't have any internet and the lighthouse only seemed to have ways of measuring the temperature. As I made my way around the house the long way, I was so hesitant as to where I was stepping. Once I make it to the lighthouse, I get to the door and try and hold myself in place. This wind must have been around 80 to 100 miles per hour. I'm around 60 kilograms, so I'm not a particularly light girl for only 5'4". I stood in place and tried my best to put the center of mass into my legs. I was in a squat position while trying to jam the rusted key into the keyhole. I needed to go to the toilet so bad, but I couldn't unlock the damn door. Once the key got into the keyhole, it wouldn't turn to the left. No matter how much I tried to turn it anti-clockwise, it just wouldn't unlock. I tried the handle, and the door just popped open. The second it popped open, I realized it wasn't even locked, and then as soon as a gap forms between the door creaking open and the entry, the door swings and slams right up against the back of the lighthouse as it gets caught in a massive gust of wind. I try and control the door. I grab it from the inside handle and pull it closer, then I slam it shut, sealing myself inside of the lighthouse. As I stand in that lighthouse, it was pitch black. The only thing I could see was the light echoing and resonating off the top beams. I looked all around and tried to remember where Dad said the light switch was. I started feeling all around the doors, I started feeling all around the walls until eventually I found a switch. I flipped it and it lit up the downstairs area. The toilet was on the downstairs floor, so it shouldn't be too hard from here on out. I went over to the toilet, did my business, and then washed my hands. On the way out of the bathroom, I started hearing these weird noises coming from higher up in the lighthouse. They sounded like a dog, it was like grunting/small soft barking. I didn't really know what it was because I couldn't make out what it was. But as I looked all around, I couldn't see anyone anywhere, so I just figured it was sounds from the wind. As I went back to the door, I'm halfway towards getting there, still drying off my hands on my t-shirts. I'm in the process of trying to zip up my coat again, ready to battle with the crazy winds outside. When all of a sudden, I hear a whole ass bark coming from upstairs. The last time I checked, there wasn't supposed to be random dogs in lighthouses. Especially when the lighthouses are being used as Airbnb stays. It got my attention. I looked up and as soon as I did, I could see a huge black dog making its way down the steps towards me. I turned around and I'm not even joking, ran faster than I've ever ran in my entire life. When I got to the door of that white house, I busted the key out of the lock, pulling it from the inside, opened the door and slammed it shut from the outside. Then I put the key in and locked it. As I went back to the house, I remember looking back up to the top. When I looked at the top of the lighthouse, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I could see a figure of a man just stood there. He had a funny hat on. These whole waterproof coats and boots on, and he was stood there. His body was being illuminated by the light at the very top of the lighthouse. But I didn't know why this guy was there or who he was. I went back into the house after battling with the wind for 2 or 3 minutes. The same thing happened again. When I opened the door, everything went flying. I got thrown into the room and Dad woke up yet again. Dad came out and I told him that someone's in the lighthouse. He looked scared and confused after we'd managed to shut and lock the outbuilding house door for good. We stood in that room dialing the host number. They didn't wake up at first, but on the second ring they did. I explained what I saw. I saw a dog and a man stood at the very top. She said that there's no one there. And that she double-checked everything before she left. They had an issue with some people breaking in and trying to stay there, but I've just locked whoever's in there inside of the lighthouse. I didn't go to sleep at all for the next few hours until sunrise. When the sun finally rose and we had light out, me, my dad, and my brother went round to the lighthouse and unlocked the door. We didn't know what to expect. At first we called up and our voices echoed to the very top of the lighthouse. There were no barks and there were no replies from any man or woman. Slowly we made our way up the steps until we got from each floor to the very top of the lighthouse. The toilet was clear and the entire lighthouse was empty. There was something really scary about the whole encounter. But by far the scariest was when we came back down. As we were coming back down the steps, I noticed in the bottom floor area just outside of the toilet there were muddy footprints. None of us had caused those as we hadn't gone over to that point. However, I remember that I did that night. So I walked over, I joked, "Hey look, it's my prints from last night." Then, as I go over I realize, the prints aren't of my shoes, they're way too big to be of my shoes. Instead, they look like massive boots. And even worse, beside them, were the prints of muddy paws. Female, 25, I travel around a lot for my work. I was at a conference in 2019, just before lockdown started, and I had a stroke of bad luck. I had originally planned on going to a hotel and checking myself in, but that plan didn't go quite to plan, as when I turned up, there were no rooms available. I couldn't really believe it. A Tuesday in the middle of January, you couldn't make this shit up, as if everyone chose to go on holiday 2 weeks after Christmas. Either this hotel was extremely popular, or they were just lying. I remember leaving those hotel doors thinking, right, well technically, I'm homeless now, so what am I gonna do? Sleep in my car? Sleep on the floor, or just try and drive 7 hours home and then make it home for 5 in the morning? By which time, there'd be no point in even sleeping. I decided to calm myself down and do the next logical thing that thought in my mind. That was to get an Airbnb. I had used Airbnb in the past with my cousin and my older brother. This was during birthday celebrations and a wedding. But I didn't like the idea of getting one all by myself. It's not like I really had a choice though. Airbnb versus 7-hour drive home all through the night while completely exhausted. I chose Airbnb. I got back in my car and locked the doors. I stayed in the parking lot of this hotel for a while as I scrolled through the Airbnb listings in the local area. I'd had a long day. Our conference had spanned since 6 a.m. and had only just finished at around midnight. The guy running it didn't have any track of time whatsoever. He must have been in his mid-70s and reminded me a bit of Joe Biden. He would talk about one thing. Stop talking about it mid-sentence and just get distracted. Then when he came back to talk about what he was talking about, he'd forget it entirely. In my eyes, the conference was a huge waste of time and gas money. Gas money I had to pay for out of my own pocket. But I'll stop ranting about this, as I really had no choice. It was either I go and keep my job or I don't go and risk being struck off by my boss. For a while I've been scrolling through the listings and only 2 were available for instant booking that hour. Both of them didn't look too great and were both attached to another house. My safety was a concern being a lady in my mid-20s. I'd never really had any ordeals or issues out in the streets. But that's because I kept myself away from difficult situations. It felt like now, for the first time in ages, I was putting myself in that difficult situation, one that I needed to be very careful of. The 2 Airbnbs that were available were the only options I had, so I sent messages to both of the hosts and asked them if I was able to come in within the next hour. I explained briefly in a little sentence what I was doing there, why I was here, and also why I needed it such short notice. One of the ladies replied, her name was Ella, and she was looking for me to stay for at least 3 days minimum. I told her I only needed it for 1 night, and we got into a little bit of a bitchy argument over the phone. I agreed that after all this, I would pay her for 3 nights. Just give me the damn fucking bed and let me sleep in it. After pocketing out $300 or $400 just to stay in a damn attached house for 1 night, I made my way to the location as I got sent the address by Ella. When I turned up, I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. The place looked way smaller than it did on the photos, and it didn't look very inviting at all. I grabbed my stuff and went in to inspect it. Ella was waiting by the door as I got out my car. Her presence kinda startled me, as she never mentioned that she would be there. She simply gave me the key code and told me to help myself. Ella was a weird type of lady. She was in her mid to early 40s, I'd say, based on how she looked and what she was wearing. When she took me inside, she showed me around briefly, explaining the different rooms and how the toilet was basically broken. On top of that, the place looked like it hadn't been hoovered, dusted, or cleaned in a good few weeks, which was another downside. Every room Ella took me around was another reminder that I had just spent $400 down a drain. It was great. A great feeling of the best day of my entire life. Finally, Ella left and I was too tired to even make myself any food. It was around 2 in the morning at this point, so I decided to quickly order a curry from down the road. It arrived fast and it tasted pretty good. I wafted it down, with my mouth still burning and tingling from the spices. I made my way over to the kitchen sink. I chucked a few things in the trash can and tried to clean up as best I could. With my mouth still tingling, the sensation I love by the way, I decided that I was going to have a quick shower before I head to bed. At this rate, I might as well have just driven home as it's gonna be light by the time I get to sleep, I think to myself. I get in the shower and at first the damn thing won't even work. I try pulling the nozzle, The downwards position is supposed to be for warm water, but as I pull it, some dribbles of freezing cold water come out all over my body. I shriek in pain and also surprise, and kinda jump back, causing me to slip and bang my head on the edge of the bath. This was one of the showers that were within the bath. They're super scary and super sketchy, seeing as if you fall over and slip, you're gonna hurt yourself. I managed to regain myself. I didn't pass out, but I had a damn headache and my head was pounding. I decided not to have a shower anymore, so I got out and put my night clothes on. Over the next half hour or so, I started to get a swollen lump on the back of my head, and it was starting to really hurt. I got myself into bed and started to relax. Then, before I knew it, I must have fallen asleep. I can't remember anything else between falling asleep and what happened next, but it felt like I had been asleep for days. It's hard to explain as we have no perception of time in our dreams/sleep. Well, I don't. Maybe some of you do, and I know some people on here may be able to lucid dream or be good viewers in their dream, but I feel like I'm a total victim in my dreams. And I start to feel confused and scared if they last too long. The dream I was having was a never-ending one. It was of me when I was younger. I was wearing my favorite dress, my dad was still alive and he was taking me along a forest path. Our goal, to go camping, enjoy the summer's weather, and bond. The dream went on and on and on, until it didn't last a day, it didn't last a week, but the dream lasted a whole month. Then, when it finally ended, I woke up in hospital. It turns out I had given myself severe concussion, mild brain damage, and I hadn't woken up that morning. My body had shut itself down, and when Ella came to find me in the morning, she said I wasn't even awake. I was still laying there in bed, totally unresponsive. She saved my life, and even though technically it's her fault for why I fell over, I'm not gonna be nasty. You idiots commenting down below that I should sue her, that is unbelievable. Some people are lazy, they don't maintain their businesses/Airbnbs, but that's up to them. I slipped on the water out of shock from the coldness hitting my chest. That was a reaction from me. And yes, the hot water gauge was broken. But all that matters now is that I'm actually alive and here. Besides, if Ella had left me the 3 days which I actually paid for, then I could have just died. I most likely would have. As the nurses and doctors said, that would have been the case. I didn't have any speech issues or any loss of feeling down any side of my body after I recovered. It was like I'd been in one long sleep. I'd been in hospital for 2 days, that was when I woke up, but the dream felt like a whole month had gone by, and it was scary how slow the whole thing felt. The bleed on my brain has been healed, and I had surgery to correct a few issues. Brain surgery's scary, only if you're aware of it. If you're not, then you're camping with your dad in a summer's forest. Maybe he came back to visit me. Maybe he came back to comfort me. That's how I like to see it. I was on summer camp, age 19, gender, male. When I go to summer camp, I don't really enjoy myself. In all honesty, I only went there to please my parents and keep them happy. I'd been going there since I was 8 years old, and at no point in any year did I actually look forward to going there. Mostly because the leaders were all a bunch of weirdos, extremely strict, and acted like they also hated being there. I know that this isn't how it is for all summer camps, but my one just seemed to be bad. Period. As we got older, me and my friends found a tactic to sneak out. My parents are extremely strict, and even though I was now 19 years old, kept forcing me to go to summer camp every single year between July and August. I think this was their way of getting rid of me, having the house to themselves so they could get up to what God knows. That was none of my business. I guess I was in their hair a lot, and they hated it. Even if I did spend most of my time playing video games at my desk, they just didn't like me. And I know that for a fact. My friends and I started leaving summer camp once we reached 18. The leaders now said that they no longer had parental supervision over us or some type of authority, so there's nothing they could do if we just walked off site and did whatever we wanted. We started doing this, and it went from just driving around in Nathan's truck to eventually going places like the store or the mall. We'd go shopping, go meet girls, and just have a good time. We'd always usually come back in the evenings to go to sleep in our tent, trying to be as quiet as possible. The summer camp we go to is structured out based on your age. There are 4 fields. The first one is 5 to 10 years, the second one is 10 to 12 years, the third one is 12 to 15 years, and the last one is 15 and anyone over. Usually there's a cap on anyone under 21, but as a whole, I think there were people there that were actually younger than that, but they stayed in the wrong tent. The leaders started to not really care as the years went by, seeing as they knew us, and we were familiar faces to them. Nothing dodgy ever went down, there was no perverts or creeps even though some of the leaders did act like it. I knew in reality they weren't, and they were actually quite good at what they did. As much as I moan on about summer camp, I learned a lot from it, a lot of skills, life lessons, and even a few languages that I started learning through one of the leaders. It was July 2018 and we were both sick and tired of having to stay at this summer camp. Me, Nathan, and 3 more of our buddies decided that we were going to go and get an Airbnb a couple miles south from the forest. It was a couple miles south from where we were, but it was still within the national park grounds. So we figured it would be a good idea and just a little bit of fun, right? It was a log cabin. It had 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a bathroom. It would cost only $40 per night, which even back then was dirt cheap. My friend used his phone to reach out to the host and he booked it the same night that we went there. When we turned up in Nathan's truck, the place looked creepy, right out of a horror film. The entire cabin was surrounded by trees, thick woodland, and pure darkness. You couldn't see around 3 inches in front of your own feet, as the only light was coming from the front porch of the log cabin. As we got closer, Nathan reached his hand under the doormat and grabbed out an old key. He extends his arm and unlocks the door. I could smell the distinct aroma of the wood coming off of the panels. It was quite rich, quite strong, and an earthy smell that kind of, if anything, made me feel grounded in my nature. I love the outdoors. But summer camp was shit because of how strict they all were. Now that we were miles away from them, they were kinda worried seeing as this was our first night, not going back to the camp. One of the leaders, Steven, ended up calling Nathan on his cell phone. Nathan answered and said that we were staying at a hotel nearby. Steven seemed a little pissed off, but there wasn't much he could do. So he just hung up the phone and sounded like he wanted to kick us out of summer camp altogether. I get that he may have been worried, but why was he so worried about us now we were adults? We were no longer under his supervision, but I knew that if he rang home, my mom and dad would up and drive 2 hours to come and spank my ass to then take me home and ground me just because I was staying in a cabin 2 miles from where I should have been. That evening was fun. We did a whole lot of crazy shit. We played games, we merely drank some cans of beer, and we stuffed our faces full of over $100 worth of takeout pizza. I felt like throwing up, and I felt like I had a fun time, that was for sure. We all called it a night at around 3 in the morning, by which point I could hear the birds already tweeting outside. Could sense the sun rising. As I made my way to my bed, there were 2 bedrooms, so it was 2 by 2, me, Nathan in one bedroom and Billy and Sam in the other. One of us would have had to sleep on the floor. We did rock paper scissors for that and I lost, woohoo, a good old sore back against the wooden floor. That was fun, but it actually ended up saving my life. At some point in the night, I woke up to these weird noises coming from above my head. It sounded like creaking and cracking sounds, but I couldn't quite make them out until I'd come around properly. I focused my attention on what I was actually hearing, but before I could really fathom or understand what it actually was, 2 massive beams from the ceiling collapsed down and landed on the bed beside me. I can't hear Nathan. All I can see is a massive wooden beam collapsed on top of his body. I get up and immediately start trying to pull it off him. Then Billy and Sam from next door come into the room. Billy's in his boxers and Sam's in some weird children's pajamas as if he's still 9 years old. The 3 of us run over and try and pick this beam off of Nathan. It's so heavy that barely the 3 of us are making any difference in taking this thing off his body. While Billy and Sam were trying to yank this thing off of him, moving it off the side of the bed, I was trying to talk to Nathan to see if he was actually still alive. While doing this, I had time to actually take everything in. I looked everywhere. I looked above and the ceiling had basically fallen in. I could see more structure in the roof. It looked like these massive logs that had been cut and sliced up, and for whatever reason, one of them seemed to have collapsed and fallen on top of Nathan. While I was trying to get Nathan to respond to me, I couldn't understand why he wasn't. I checked for a pulse and there was one, but he was acting as if he was dead. My friends were still trying to yank this beam off of him. It was so heavy that we couldn't do anything. If I was to predict how long this beam was, I would say it was around 20 feet. It was massive, one of the main beams that came from the ceiling. As I tried my best to rejoin Billy and Sam in pulling this thing off Nathan, it simply wasn't doing anything. We were trying everything we could to roll it sideways rather than actually picking it up cleanly. Seeing as that would have been a better option, but it still wasn't working. The more I tried to get this off him, the more exhausted I became. I looked at Sam and Billy and gave them the look as if to say, "We're fucked." While they're still trying, I run over to my bag and get my cell phone. I've got zero signal, so I drive all the way out in Nathan's truck and try. When I finally get one bar, I dial 911. I didn't know where to say I was, because I had no idea where I was. Nathan was the one that had booked this Airbnb, so he was the only one that knew where we actually were. The dispatcher managed to track the phone, and within a few minutes, I could hear sirens off into the distance. We're around 5 miles from the nearest town. So I was thankfully surprised when I heard the sirens. I stayed out on the main tracks, and when the cops finally arrived, there were 2 of them. They ran into the cabin with me, and now there were over 5 of us all trying to get this damn log off of Nathan's body. I remember stepping back into the bedroom with the cops. Nathan's face had gone completely blue. And when I later found out that he couldn't even breathe the whole time the beam was on him, it turns out that he was starving his brain of oxygen. The beam had crushed his rib cage, it had inflated his lungs / deflated and punctured them because of the ribs, and now he was basically suffocating and dying from lack of oxygen in his brain. Having the cop stare made it possible to actually nudge this beam off of him. It came crashing down off the bed and onto the floor below. Even the cop struggled with all 5 of us giving everything we had to get this thing off of him. Eventually, the cops saw to him, they put him in the recovery position and immediately got an ambulance to come straight out. Nathan was airlifted to hospital. The helicopter landed in the land where we were staying by the Airbnb. Everything genuinely felt so surreal, and I thought I was in some kind of a nightmare. I also think of what are the possibilities that I had woken up even a few seconds earlier and pulled Nathan out of the way. It's a sheer miracle that that beam didn't fall on me as well as him. Nathan has brain damage, and I didn't ever think that he would make it. He has severe brain damage and has been paralyzed from the waist down for the rest of his life. He's currently taking part in Paralympic sports. He doesn't want anything to affect him, and the last thing he wants is anyone feeling sorry for him. I remember a few years ago now, he told me that he wanted to make the Paralympics in 2024. Well, that's in a few years from now, so I don't know who'll actually make it. If you're reading this, you might see him in it if you're reading it in 2024. Wish him the best of luck, and you know his story. I think that Nathan is a warrior. It doesn't matter what's thrown his way, he will always and continuously fight for his life. It wasn't long before there was an entire fire department, entire police department, and 7 ambulances outside of this Airbnb. Just to top it off, the host turned up, which was kinda creepy because Nathan never contacted her. He was too busy dying of brain damage. Why on earth did she turn up? Did the cops know her? Did they contact the homeowner? Or did she have secret cameras? I don't know which one it was. But the last of my concerns were the secret cameras, when my friend Nathan just got paralyzed. He isn't how he used to be, he's changed mentally, and sometimes he forgets who I even am. It's sad, scary, and if I'm honest, I wouldn't wish this on anyone. The other day Nathan came round, we sat and had some lunch together, and sometimes I'm bad, he has to be fed. He doesn't enjoy being fed through the funnel/tube. The feeding tube is demoralizing. It takes away the enjoyment of biting and crunching food. Also, your taste buds don't really enjoy the feeding tube. It could have been worse. Some people have feeding tubes through their stomachs, some through their mouths, some I think even through their throat/esophagus. Nathan is always going to be my hero, but I can't stop thinking about that one night that this all went down. It reminds me of how life fragile, and generally how precious, life can be at times.